Welcome to the Counterweight podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Kanary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that help them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. And this is a first among first. It has been a phenomenal year, a lot of things that we couldn't imagine. But this is certainly one of those things that I don't know that I ever expected. We have our first international guest, Eric Hren, joining us from Australia. So not just Canada, not South America. Those are great countries. We literally
South America is a continent. Just want to clarify.
Well, now I'm thinking about my own.
Australia is both a country and a continent, correct?
Yes.
So we're covering both.
That's fair. And I feel like I
we've
now
never
have to
covered before
to remedial
and
school.
A country.
Yes.
This is amazing, right? Groundbreaking.
The short of it is we literally went around the world to find our next guest. Eric Hren, could not be more pleased to welcome you to the pod. Thank you for joining. Let's first start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing these days, and actually tell our listeners, we don't usually timestamp the pod, but what time is it right now?
It's 10:15 p.m. right now, and
nice.
I'm based here in Sydney, which is on the East Coast. If you work your way to the West Coast, what we call the Western end, and what they refer to us as the Eastern State people. In Western Australia, they are the farthest away from us, and depending on the time zone, they could be 3 hours away. New Zealand could be 3 hours away on the other side of us. But we moved here. We've been in Australia. We've always lived in Sydney since 2016 September. So we actually just hit our eight years of being here as a family. So my wife and I moved here.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. She's American by background, Chicago by background. And when we moved here, did not have any family, any kids, any dogs. And flash forward to 2024, we have almost 3-year-old who's sleeping soundly. Thankfully, he's a sound sleeper. He'll stay asleep tonight during this. And it's been a great journey since the move first happened. When the company that I worked for moved us here. No longer with that company, which I'm sure we'll talk about and how all that transition worked. But now we're dual citizens. So we're actually going to be traveling for some holiday coming up. What we call holiday. There's your first maybe.
There we go.
Come on, James.
Holiday
get on it.
is what we call vacation. Everyone.
Yeah,
so,
as dual citizens, you get 2 passports, and we were proud to get our citizenship last March in 2023. My wife and I both did it at the same time, went through the ceremony. But our son was born. When he was born, he was a dual citizen upon birth. And so it was pretty cool to, we take a lot of pride in it. But yeah, we look back on it and just smile every time, because we never would have thought over 8 years ago we made the move, but we did. And we're both better off for it as individuals, as a family, and as what we'll talk about my professional career as well.
I mean,
you've done a great job maintaining your Ohio accent, Eric. Just want to say, way to preserve the Ohio has not left you at all.
He's bringing Ohio to the other side of the world. That's what he's doing.
You might hear it. You might hear it once or twice.
Well, so Eric, you so first of all, you're a global citizen. A citizen of the world. Let's talk a little bit. We're going to go to, we'll get to how you got there, but let's talk about what you're doing these days. So you're with a company called Innowell. Why don't you just describe for our listeners your role, the scope of responsibilities you have, and probably more specifically, what is it that Innowell does, and where are you focused in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I took on the role of Chief Growth Officer last March. So I came from, left my role with Cerner, now Oracle Health, of almost 13 and a half years, and moved to a company that I knew nothing about. And what I learned quickly was it was a very specific piece of technology and software that plays in the mental health space. And the mental health space was a topic I knew about very broadly speaking. I knew about some of the challenges we have here in country, some of the challenges that are happening in other global markets. And I knew about the clinical workflow very broadly from my past career. But what I didn't know was, as I started reading about the data around the lack of digitalization of specifically we call it mental health here in Australia, the UK market, other markets call it mental health. I know in America it is referred to as behavioral health. So I'll refer to it as mental health just for the sake of consistency. But it's the same concept, so mental health and addiction. But what we do is we provide the clinical tooling for any clinician that is doing the triaging and the assessment of an individual in any service or a care setting. So it could be your hospital, it could be your primary care outpatient center. And what it's doing is it's providing the smarts behind the technology to be able to do that triaging and assessment better, quicker, more accurately, to be able to have the research, the clinical validation, to understand how you're doing that scoring. So today, what likely is happening is they're putting an order in the electronic medical record. So go pick your electronic medical record. And that order says Eric presented with potential anxiety, or he's suicidal ideation as a root cause of why he showed up. But what's happening today in the EMR is it's putting an order in saying, go give Eric an assessment. And that assessment is likely a stack of papers or something that they'll hand you. So you fill it out as the individual. It'll get sent back to the clinician or the care team. Someone will eventually score it, eventually decide where Eric needs to go. So there's time being lost. There's the inaccuracy of and subjectivity of how someone is scoring that. So what we're doing is we're making that process more efficient, making it more accurate, making sure that individual is not getting passed around service to service, getting put in the wrong service, and then having the understanding of measurement-based care, which is a broad terminology in this space around how you're actually providing care as a strategy. And our tooling, our technology supports it. And our key message we give to stakeholders, especially government stakeholders, and I think this is a key message for anyone selling software in health, gone are the days of we will go solve all your problems because we're a big EMR company and we think we can go do everything. We are very clear of what we don't do, but we're very clear in defining our support for their current investment and the value that we bring to help support that investment, because we're not naive to think that here in our state where I live, it's called New South Wales, they're going to be ripping and replacing their current EMR, the Oracle Health EMR, with the Epic EMR. And that's going to cost upwards of $2 billion. And
just small amount of money.
Small amount of money. Same thing. I could point to the province we're working at in Canada, where they've made a significant investment into a large EMR for about $3 billion. And it's taken them about 8 to 10 years to go turn it on, start to realize some of the outcomes. So you have to put your mindset in the shoes of those individuals, those stakeholders who have made that significant investment, that they want to know how you will complement that investment, support that investment, and then of course, what's the value that we bring. So if we don't lead with that message, what I've found very quickly, being in a different type of market from where my previous career was at, is you're not going to be able to advance the conversation or distinguish yourself from the rest of the market. So it's been an interesting journey for about, almost probably 18 months now.
Yeah.
Since we have a little under 20 people. So 19 of us here in country, in New South Wales. We're all located here in Sydney. And then we had recently hired our first associate, our general manager for Canada. She leads and is the face and representation for our Canadian business.
That's awesome.
Awesome. So would you describe yourselves as kind of startup, scale up, kind of where are you on the company journey?
Yeah, I would definitely describe it in the scale up phase. And when I went into this, I was a bit naive because I just came from a different background, and I learned quickly from a great set of leaders within our business, our board, around some of that distinction around what does that entail when you say you're a startup versus scale up, and what's the message that you're potentially trying to tell investors, future investors. But right now we're in the scale up. We have live clients today, paying customers. The largest health system in Canada is one of our main clients, and then everything down to think of a single small service that provides youth services, youth mental health services here in country. And we have those here in Australia as well. So it's a range of the need for that large, for those listening that deal with the IDNs, the health systems of the world, but also having to tailor your strategies and your messages down to that smaller provider or service group.
So can you share, you mentioned like the lessons you've learned going from a larger, more established company where there's no issue with name recognition. There's a lot of resources. You're now in a different place with fewer resources, maybe not as much name recognition. What are some of the things you've done, or what are some of the lessons you've learned as you made that transition? And I know our listeners are across the board. We've got folks at large companies, small companies, startups, scale-ups, some who are considering maybe making changes. What are some of those lessons you've learned in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also apply moving from global markets and moving from the US to Australia to now where I'm at. I think that question applies even with those lessons learned. And the one, so I would say it's two things. The first thing is what I always call is the constant. And the constant is no matter if you're at a large corporate or if you're at a scale up, startup, America, Australia. I did business in New Zealand, still do business in New Zealand, Canada. What matters and what the constant is the relationships you develop and the time and effort that you authentically put into those relationships. And especially with the time, it's the year 2024, and there are so many great technologies and tools that can help us with what we do day to day and how to make our lives more efficient. And that's always going to continue to evolve and grow, and challenges come with it, and the good and bad of why those tools may help us. But the constant that will always be there is, are you developing those authentic relationships, then supported by the modern day technology of the day, whatever it might be, the AI tool over here, the CRM tool over there. But if you can't understand the first part of that equation, which is people will remember how they felt about you when you left the room, one way or the other. They're going to say, that person, Eric, was listening to my problems. He addressed my problems. He talked with me, not at me. And gosh, I want to take a second meeting with him. Right? I'll go back to my original point, is to be authentic when you show up, when you're having those conversations, because people will see that. They will see through, yes, there was some tool that may have automated a great email or a great piece of marketing or a great video that you made them. All those tools that I talked about on the other side of the equation that will support you, those will be there, and they are going to love those. And majority of them, they're flashing, they're great. But what they'll remember is how you treated them, how you approached the first conversation with them. Did you look them in the eye? I just taught my soon-to-be 3-year-old son, I don't know why this started the other week, but I started talking to him about, look dad in the eye when you talk, like in a very not in a look me in the eye, but hey, Luca, when you look at me, here's why you look at people in the eye. So my message is, don't lose sight of what some people might call the traditional values of what I define as the constant, and that is the relationships in life, while still maintaining and learning from all the great tools and technologies that are going to make you more efficient. And it doesn't matter where you are at in the world, what conversations you're having, because that will shine if you can perfect the first part of that equation.
Man, that's such a good word.
I think, great advice. And I think great advice for our listeners, authentic, humble, don't be afraid to ask. Eric, one of our other guests, Amy Teskey, she made the observation that as she talked with healthcare technology leaders, so chief information officers, chief medical informatic officers, et cetera, one of the learnings that she took away, which I hear you articulating, is that oftentimes those leaders bought from people they trust, and they even more so would buy again from the person they trusted, regardless of what company they were at. So as they moved companies, they were following the relationship, less so the technology. Let's actually just take a moment, and we're going to thank one of our sponsors, which is Amy Teskey. She has a group called the Echelon. We're gonna thank them for a moment, and then we'll come back to the session. The Counterweight is honored to be sponsored by the Echelon by Amy Teskey. The Echelon is intentional about building community and sharing expertise for healthcare technology sellers and leaders. The Echelon provides members curated content, educational materials, and the ability to connect with peers and leaders specific to healthcare technology. Sales can be hard. It is made easier when you are part of a community that is focused on enabling you to be your best. Take an opportunity to invest in yourself. Join the Echelon. Use the code Counterweight and gain the ability to participate for the first 30 days at no cost. Thank you to Amy Teskey and the Echelon for your sponsorship. Now back to the episode.
All right, so we're back, and I gotta ask before you. So your 3-year-old, who now knows, it's Luca. Look him in the eye. How many deals has he closed? Where is he at on quota?
Well, his birthday's coming up, so we'll see how many deals he closed with his mates. There you go. So his mates, he calls them mates.
There it is. Second word of the day. Yeah. Okay, we'll flash that up. We'll put the definition up there.
No Z's, mates, and
birthday present. Yeah. But what I'll say to a previous comment you made before the break, Doug, was around you were referring almost to people, the network that people remember you by if you move companies. And I saw that when I moved from so I was with Cerner from now Oracle Health from 2010 to 2016. Then we moved here, then left the company in March 2023. So about 7 years almost here on the Australia side of the world. And what I found fascinating was when I did my traditional LinkedIn update, I'm with mixed emotion, making a career change. It was fascinating to see some of the individuals who reached out, sent a message that I just forgot that I had connected with, not just in America, let's just call it the non-Australia part of the world, but even in Australia, and how much those connections are still here today with my current role. And one of them was there's a group in the mental health space that they are the peak advocacy group for all things e-mental health. So they're called the E-Mental Health International Collaborative, or EMIC. And they just had their annual Congress and get together that brought together all your major market global leaders within all the countries in Canada about 2 weeks ago. And the gentleman that leads that he's the general manager. He's a Kiwi. He's from New Zealand. And
Kiwi. Let's capture Kiwi, that. Not Australian, but New Zealand.
Just a fruit.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And when I got into the role, one of the very first calls I had with let's just call it an industry stakeholder that I didn't even know this group existed was with this individual and this gentleman. And we had met previously in New Zealand in my previous job at an industry event. And we just started connecting, and he said, let me tell you a little bit about what my organization does, how I think this could bring value to you. And it was one of the first immediate conversations I had that I remembered where I said, okay, there's value to what I was doing previously. I just didn't know it at the time. So you can't, my point is you can't plan on, okay, and in 5 years from now, if I'm really good to this person, gosh, they're going to help me out and make my life easier. Either you show up with that authenticity to want to learn about that individual, that organization, how to help them out, or you don't. You truly cannot fake that. And there's no piece of technology, there is no AI that is going to help you become that, or help you develop that. So when you said that, Doug, previous to the break, it just reminded me that is very real. And even with contacts in, again, not Australia, let's just say anywhere else in the world besides Australia, you'd be shocked to learn how much that will pop up in your life, and not just in your professional career, but your personal career.
I just absolutely agree, Eric, with both that approach and that mentality. We've talked about this in other sessions, and I've said, I've been candid. One of the regrets, self-criticisms that I have of myself is that I have not always been great about investing in those relationships, and not intentionally not investing, but not taking the time to do that. And as I look back on my own career, I wish I would have been better. I wish I would have had that learning sooner, and do what I'm doing now, not just to maintain, but to grow and to be able to learn from that community that you build over time. So, for our listeners, I think, underscore this great advice. Take the time to go grab a coffee with someone you haven't talked to, that you haven't connected with in a while. It will benefit you in ways that you probably don't even know today. Eric, let's
that's
focus.
Really good advice. Just to close that out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, show up.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Show up.
Battle is showing up. So showing up for that coffee. And I just think back, gosh, how many people at conferences or events did I just kind of ignore, or was I thinking, well, they don't have the title or whatever? And I just think, man, you just never know the seeds that you'll plant. Yeah. And you may not walk by that spot again for another 5 years. 10 years later, that could be a huge tree that's blossomed from a seed you planted. And so I just think the intentionality that Eric's talking about is healthy for all of us in every relationship. Relationships are what make this thing happen, right? Yeah. Technology is a part of it, all the support, but it's the relationships that make it happen. So really good word, Eric.
That's right. Yeah. Eric, I do want to come back to the transition from big co to small company. And let me just ask a couple of, I guess, probably more tactical questions. As you transitioned into your current organization, so your chief growth officer, talk a little bit about some of the things that you felt like either were challenges that you needed to overcome, or if you thought about the first 90 days, what were some of the big boulders that you wanted to get across? For example, did you need to go define, hey, what is the ideal client profile that we should be going after? Did y'all have a sales methodology that you were embracing, or did you need to do something different with your team? Just talk us through a couple of the tactical things in that first 90 days that were important to you and the progress that your organization's making.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really fortunate that so I report to our CEO. So from our CEO and our board, right away they said, we hired you for a reason. Just go figure it out, go do. And let us know what that doing involves and what that plan involves. And so that was great. It was scary. It was something I wasn't used to coming from. Coming from a big corporate, and that's just the nature of, I think, any corporate, not just the one I came from. So that was all great. But what I did have to quickly, and I still feel like I do it today, and I'm 18 months later, is I have to switch off what I was accustomed to from 13 years of, well, this is how I was muscle memoried into thinking about a certain thing or approaching a certain thing. And I had to just almost stop and remind myself, hey, you're not in that world anymore. You're not in that world that said you need to have 10 people look at this and check it off before you can go do something. And again, that can be good. That can be very scary, depending how you're wired. So that was not that it was a bit of imposter syndrome where, wait, so I'm allowed to go, quote unquote, allowed. So I'm going to go do this, or I can just, we don't need to have 5 meetings to make a decision. But once I got once I got myself past that, it's a great feeling, trust me, but it's also, it can be scary, a scary thing to do. So those lessons were definitely there early on. For us, trying to the mental health market, I'll give you a stat that to put this into perspective for people. So the best that we could find around the digital maturity of the mental health or behavioral health space actually came out of the Medicaid office in the US in 2020. So they said that there were 6% of all behavioral health facilities in America were at the time digitized, while 90 plus percent of all non-mental health facilities or behavioral health facilities, of course, are digitized. So anyone familiar with the space knows that it's been going on for almost, let's call it 10 to 15 years roughly, since the Obama administration had the incentivization to digitize the acute space. For whatever reason, the behavioral health, mental health space has not been. And so when I first read that statistic early on into my role with Innowell, it just kind of floored me. I said, well, if that's coming from the US, and if anyone knows how the other global markets follow the digital maturity, so you got the US is quote unquote leading the way, then you got the UK, Canada, then Australia. So if the US is at 6%, we still have not found good, accurate data around the digital maturity of those other markets. But I can confidently say that the Australian market is not as mature from a digital maturity. Canada is slightly ahead. So to your question, Doug, around how did we then define our user profile, that was difficult because you were defining a market that didn't exist and didn't know that they had a potential problem with doing things on pen and paper. And the analogy we would give to someone who just wanted to learn about this space, we said, well, a radiologist we asked them, what does a radiologist use? And they'll name all the technologies and the tools that a radiologist uses. And you say the same for a cardiologist. Well, a cardiologist has his or her following tools, and you list them out. And then you get to a clinician who's delivering mental health care, and the answer, unfortunately, for a majority of scenarios is pen and paper, right? Yeah. So then you take it one step further, and I was on
a leather couch also. Leather couches.
Yeah, it's truly, it's if you've ever had to fill out like a K-10 assessment, your GP or your doc, we call them GPs, but your primary care doctor might send you your K-10 and you fill it out on paper and you don't know what happened. You're not tracking the data of those outcomes in general. But I had a consultant tell me this week, I said, here in Australia, I'm giving her the pitch on who we are, what we do. And I said, are the organizations you talk with, after like 20 minutes of me talking, I said, is this a top 3 priority? Like what I'm describing, like the challenges of not being digitized and the effects on the services. And right away she goes, well, they don't know what they don't know. They know they need to do something, but they don't know how to get there.
Interesting.
And every time I hear that, it just reminds me of what, as the EMR boom started in 2010-ish, everyone knew they needed to do something because of the carrot and stick that was given to them from the government at the time. But that carrot and stick is not here yet in this market. It's not there in Canada. It's not there in the UK for mental health. There's a few indicators that it will, but going back to your question and fully rounding it off, Doug, with the actual answer, did we have our user profile fully defined when I first started? No. Are we better at it? Are we better at it today, as we wrap up almost 2024? Absolutely. But that focus has taken time, and it's okay to fail and say, gosh, we just got that wrong. That was not the market or the organization that we wanted to go to. And I had to tell myself that because we are a scale up business, that it actually is okay to fail in the way that, not that previous careers haven't told me it's not okay to fail, but there was much more visibility when you fail.
But it's different. It's different. I mean,
it's different, but I would argue that mentality is important for any company.
Agreed.
Is to embrace failure, to admit we don't have it all figured out, and to be able to be agile and pivot when you need to pivot. So my question is, how do you do that? So when you're in a startup or scale up, there's investors, there's board of directors, there's expectations, and they say, well, hey, we hired you to do this. We've given you all these resources. how do you manage that part of the relationships? You're talking about relationships on the customer side. I assume it's relationships on the stakeholder, investor, C-suite leadership side. Like, how do you navigate that when you need to make that pivot and you're trying to fail fast, but also make sure you appear competent in your role? Talk about that.
Yeah. Two things I've learned immediately, whether it's, I've been fortunate enough to work very closely with our board and understanding how, not that I never understood how a board operated, but in a scale up type business, being able to really understand the intricacies of how that works. And what I've learned really quickly is be transparent, be direct, but have your facts and have your story very clear and transparent. And don't make assumptions that someone on your board, or maybe it's one of your internal stakeholders, knows what you're referring to or knows what's going on. Because in the previous career, I always knew, well, I have my core team, whether it's my doctor executive or my nurse executive. Well, that person, they've been working with me on this deal. They know everything that's going on. So if I miss something or say something, they'll be able to back me up and make sure everyone knows what's going on. Well, I can turn to my left, I can turn to my right. Those people don't exist. And so I can make the assumption that everyone understands what's been going on to get us to that point. So that's okay to realize that, but being transparent and being direct, I don't have time to write a thesis or tell a full story, nor does the board have time for that. So getting better at that directness and that transparency, and being one of the younger members of our leadership team and as you can imagine, of our board, not being afraid to just stand up and say, this is how it is. This is my recommendation, and using those words. This is my recommendation on what I think we should do. Mm-hmm.
And so I know that here in the U.S., at least, board of directors and CEOs don't like surprises. Maybe they like surprises in Australia. I doubt it. What do you do to manage that? So so that it doesn't come as some bombshell at the board meeting? Do you have the meetings before the meeting? Do you do the individual conversations and coffees to get people bought in? What's that look like? And what's your rhythm for that communication and transparency?
Yeah. The good news is my CEO, we work very closely daily. And so from the start, being able to first and foremost with him say, here's what's going on, here's the situation, and being, again, as direct as possible. And he's been able to coach me through, and I'm the newest member of the leadership team. So the rest of the leadership team has been there for about 3 to 4 years. I've been there a year and a half now. And that's fine. But he has done a really good job to make sure that I was able to build that relationship and that trust with the board. So a lot of what you're asked, the answer to your question, a lot of that happened early on. It's just having those conversations before a board meeting, after a board meeting, and being able to show the value in why I was hired in the first place. And if there's nothing that should happen at a board meeting that should come as a surprise. And we're fortunate that we have the processes in place and just the discipline on those processes. But I know plenty of individuals and colleagues of maybe similar startups or scale-ups that doesn't exist. So while it may be frustrating at times to always have to make sure you have your board reports or things ready, there's a reason, and I've learned very early on, there's a reason we do that. And there's a reason that, going back to the relationship comments, you need to make sure you've built the trust and the rapport through good times and bad with the individuals that you work with. So I don't think there's a magic formula. I really don't.
Do you have is there a frequency that are you talking to the board on a quarterly basis, monthly basis? What's
it's in between. Yeah, it's in between that. So I would say it's probably every 6 to 8 weeks, but it's enough that early on, not that I didn't know I'd be doing that when I was hired for the role. I mean, it was made clear, here's your stakeholders you'll be engaging with. Yeah. And I read it, but until you go through it, and
it's different.
It's different. And when I say I'm young, I'm 39, but in the sense that I have not had previous career experiences that have had that type of responsibility of consistently doing that. I've had to report to the president and CEO of the previous company and the global president of the company, and that's happened dozens of times, but not at the level of a board relationship. So you take some of those lessons learned from those previous experiences, because whilst there you go, not whilst.
All right.
Put it on your bingo
Third
board.
one. We're rocking.
It's actually one of the odder words that we always talk about as a family. But those lessons that you learned in some of those, let's just call it higher stake meetings in your previous careers, the things you learned then are they help you now. Just because it's a board of directors versus the president of sales during your quarterly business reviews, or the board approval vote on a deal you were working on down in Alabama that I did, that type of pressure and tactics and preparation that you do, it all applies still with, just because they're the board of directors versus the people I just described. You should still be doing the same things. So it's sometimes I tell myself and I tell others, don't overthink this. I have a phrase, just do, right? There's if anyone knows David Goggins, he, I think it was his second book. He literally had this phrase, he goes, just do. So whenever people ask me about, what was your strategy for this? Or how did you prepare for this race or whatever? I literally have something written down that says, just do, because I almost get annoyed about reading all these life help strategy guides on things. And it's just like, just do it, show up and do it well.
Doug, isn't that Yoda? Didn't that come from Yoda? There is no try.
There's no try. Just
only do. All right,
only do,
there we
something
go.
like that.
So we'll reference that on the screen.
Yeah.
So Eric, I think that it's helpful to hear that advice. And for our listeners, let's just take a moment and recognize, I think you touched on something that's very important. The dynamic of both managing up and then managing down. There's a lot of similarities, whether you're a big or small company. And I'm paraphrasing here, but a couple of things that I've heard, you've got to be prepared. You've got to know your numbers. And you've got to be authentic in the conversation you're having with that person, whether they're your CEO, whether they're a board member, whether there's a team member, or even the client that you're engaged in. But one of the differences, and you touched on this, is that when you're in the room now, there's not someone to turn to left or right. At the end of the day, when your CEO or your board member asks you a question, they're asking you. And there's not going to be three other people that are going to come behind you and say, hey, well, actually, we have this level of detail. So, it is a different dynamic, I think, in our listeners. Hopefully you appreciate that. And as you think about putting yourself in that position, one other just quick question from a market perspective. How do you think about your, if you will, kind of demand generation, top of funnel activity? So as you said, behavioral health, mental health, largely undigitized, large market, tons of opportunity, but I imagine, not to misuse a word, a lot of friction in terms of converting opportunity to actual engagement. And you probably have a lot of people, a lot of buyers that the biggest thing you're competing against is the status quo. Well, this is good enough. Why do I need to invest time, energy, change manager, et cetera, to do something different? So what are the strategies that you and the team are using to get in front of people? Is it outbound email? Is it cold calls? Is it predominantly conferences? All of the above. What's the thing that's working for you to get in front of the most opportunities to then put those into your pipeline?
Yeah, I would say three things. So first and foremost, everyone loves a story. Right? Yeah. So I think I'm drinking out of a Disney cup, so I don't know if that's why it reminded me of it with my tea.
There you go.
Everyone loves a story is number one. And when I say that, is that when you're trying to talk to a prospective organization or to your question, get lead generation. Yeah. The first thing they want to know is, where have you done this? What were the outcomes? What were the use cases? And even though we are a scale up, that was one of my first priorities. Is I just had to understand where the success has been how do I go tell that story? How do I go tell that story to the masses? So before I could even say tactfully, oh, go to conferences or go push this email out, if I didn't know the story and if I couldn't tell the story, then all that stuff is worthless, right? What I learned from a mental health expert here locally was that how do you bridge the small clients that you might have if you're a scale up business and you know they have some really great stories, but gosh, you only have one or two of those clients and you want to make that jump over the water where you see all these big contracts, whether it's a state or a provincial contract. But gosh, like that seems really difficult because you are a small little startup or scale up. And the big thing he talked about was bridging to develop that bridge to get to the other side. You have to bridge it with the successes and the outcomes and the stories that you know you have, albeit there's a few of them. But he said, just find the way to bridge that gap, to tell that story, to share those outcomes, because that's ultimately what people want to hear. And I found that in our space, that's absolutely what they want to hear about. So we deal a lot with government stakeholders. So think of it as your state-based funders at a federal or at we call it at a state level. They'll ask you three things. They'll say, how does this make a policy we have, or how does this tie directly back to a policy position that we have and or make it better? So you have to be able to identify that. Where have you done this before? And what's the return on investment? So I had to learn very quickly that there are just certain processes that identify those buyers, Doug, was your first question. And yes, we do go to the conferences and we provide that thought leadership with those stories in hand. And we have the stories, maybe not as many as your big EMR companies that has entire teams dedicated to it. But we take a lot of pride in being able to promote hourly those successes of the organizations we have. So it's going to the right conferences. It's getting in front of the right stakeholders where you know the influence is happening. So the group I mentioned from the individual from New Zealand, I had no idea the pedigree that organization has and the respect and the caliber that it has at the time. I just happened to know the gentleman, Innowell. I knew he was a great guy. And I said, yeah, we'll sign up. We'll be strategic partners. Tell us what you need from us as a technology supplier. And ironically, this thing was 2 weeks ago, and it was one of the best investments we made. So you have to.
That's awesome.
Do some don't just throw everything at the kitchen sink type strategy, but be selective and be prescriptive with why you're making those decisions. And when you ask the question about the board, that's the very first question they'll ask is, why are we doing this versus not doing this? What's the value in you presenting, Eric, for 15 minutes in Brisbane up north about a month ago versus doing another potential strategy? And so just being able to have the information, have the data that says this is why we're doing it. And we don't do as much, to round off the question, we don't do as much direct mailing campaigns just because of how the buyers are large health systems or services, and where we're at as a business, we're not necessarily taking that approach. But we do we're very fortunate to have a good network within our board, within our advisors, to connect us to the right people, to go have the conversation. And it goes back to everything we talked about at the beginning, just being authentic when you're saying, so-and-so connected us, would really like to understand this more. I don't know this particular space. I think you do. Next thing you know, after an hour, 2-hour coffee or wherever you're going to meet that person, they're able to better guide you to what your question ultimately was asking, which is the buyers, the individuals that can help you ultimately grow your pipeline.
I believe our co-host here, James Kanary, has a phrase that I've come to love and embrace, that it's not go to market, it's go to network. Is that right, James?
Yeah, it's not my phrase. I stole it, I'm sure, from somewhere.
Yeah. Well, but for this pod, it's your phrase.
It's the relationships, right? It's relationships. And what I love, Eric, about that approach is you're being selective. You're picking the best. You're trying to pick the market leaders who have the pedigree and who know the market, and you're not selling to them per se. You're asking them for their insights and how to partner. And hey, who could benefit from this? Or what do you think is the real need here versus, hey, we got this cool thing. Let's shove it at you. So I want to make sure we got your three-pronged. I think you said three. So you're number one, get the story right. Yeah. Like tell the story, spend time on telling the story. As humans, we're programmed to listen to stories. Like the human brain, the physiology of a human being actually changes when you start to tell a story. So if you really want to get someone's attention, tell the story. So you know this, you do this really well throughout your career. You've done this. So you spend a lot of time getting the story right. And I assume you're continually refining, right? It's not like you're done, but you're continually like, hey, like what we're turning a little knob here. We're telling this story when we're in this part of the market, and then we're tweaking it here, and then showing up. There we go again with showing up, right, to the right events, talking to the right people, being selective about your investments. Then from there, like what's next for you guys?
Yeah, it's so you do all those things and you meet all these people, and being a smaller team, it's prioritizing the actual follow-up and making sure it's a priority. And this sounds really, really simple. But when you are a smaller team, and again, you look to your left and you look to your right, and you realize there is no one else that could potentially do some of those smaller things that you may have had support for. It was mentioned earlier in the conversation about being agile, being nimble. Those are not just buzzwords. Those are very real day-to-day things that I experience. And not that I wasn't ready for it, but coming back from that event from 2 weeks ago, realizing, wow, that's a good problem to have. We met with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of individuals, but how do you just sit down and prioritize who needs the attention more? Is it the individual who's the head of a provincial health authority, or is it someone who maybe is not as further along in their sales cycle and in their buying decision? But also making sure you're capturing the specific needs, challenges, and problems that they had. So it goes back to, were we listening when they were talking to us? I don't know. Everyone has their own tactic of how do they capture. So say you're at a conference and you're leaving the social hour, you're leaving the dinner. I'm an iPhone guy. My notes, someone asked me the other day, they said, what's an app you can't go without? And I answered right away, the Notes app. Because I immediately, if I'm in the Uber walking back to the hotel, I immediately write down what was important to them, what challenges do they have, and are there any processes I need to be aware of that they just told me about? Because all of that, when you're dealing with so many different potential prospects, you don't have a huge team to tell you, okay, what did you 5 people here? What did you 5 people over here learn during the conference? That doesn't exist. So you just have to have that discipline to know every day, what are those things I need to be doing to advance my pipeline, to grow my pipeline. And if you don't have that discipline to do those things, and then to wake up and say, okay, I have to go follow up with these 10 people I just met. Well, guess what? The next day you're going to meet another 10 people.
That's right.
That's right.
This goes back to this fundamental. Simple. If you don't have the discipline to do those things, then you probably don't have the discipline to do a lot of other things in life. So it sounds simple enough, but my expression of just do, I know that sounds cheesy, but truly it's just do, have the discipline, and be authentic and understand what is going on with that individual or that organization.
You know, I would say we are bombarded in this industry as sellers, as leaders, with this proliferation of AI technology tools. AI is the buzzword, right? And it is largely, I would bracket around, AI is going to make it super easy to touch 1 million people at once. AI is going to take all of the burden off of your shoulders to do the blocking, tackling. It's going to write your emails. It's going to identify the people you should talk to. It's going to give you the keywords, et cetera. And the reality of what I feel is that it's a Band-Aid approach for what should be core fundamentals in this role, which is do your research, know who and why you should be talking to someone, and then do your basic blocking and tackling. Send them a thank you note. when you talk to someone, whether it's on a phone call, at a conference, send them a note and say, hey, it was really good to talk to you. Here are the 3 things we talked about. Here's why we should have a conversation again. As I've sat in a leadership role, I'm sure, Eric, you see this, James, I know you've seen this. That is oftentimes the hardest thing to coach with a seller, because it's the easiest thing to overlook. To just, I'm so busy. I got all these other things. I've got to move on to So not to get on a stump about this, but there is no overlooking the basic blocking and tackling that actually puts you in a position of success. And Eric, I think you hit the nail on the head that if you don't have the discipline to do those basic things, you don't have the discipline to do the big things.
I want to put a fine point on that here in a moment and have Eric share some of those specific disciplines, habits that have been helpful for him. So I'm going to have you do that in a second. First, we're going to thank a couple more of our sponsors. You heard earlier about the Echelon. We've got an exciting partnership going with the Echelon. That's the community where you can go to have these kind of conversations. Maybe not with Australia every day, but pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Another sponsor is the Upper Right Corner, upperrightcorner.com, theupperrightcorner.com, very similar to the Ohio State University, Eric, which I know you're a huge fan of, even though you did not go to school there. Theupperrightcorner.com is where you can go if you need help on strategy, go to market, go to network, growth strategy, assessments, team training, interim leadership. Check it out at theupperrightcorner.com. Doug, tell us about Waypoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Waypoint is proud to sponsor the Counterweight as well. And Waypoint is a small boutique solution focused company working with health systems around patient engagement, patient navigation, and the patient experience. We have a domain expertise in voice artificial intelligence, as well as care orchestration, and are very excited to be a part of these conversations with leaders like Eric all across the globe.
Boom. So Eric, hit us with, and I know you've got stuff on your wall, you've got mantras that you live by. Share some insights with our listeners. Like, what are some of you mentioned the just do. What are some of those disciplines that have been helpful for you in your career and your life?
Yeah, so I'd say a few things. So the first thing is to surround yourself with people who are like-minded. And yes, I live very far away, and I've lived very far away for 18 years. But even here and some of my closest friends from the States, I would not have that discipline and that drive if I didn't surround myself with people who think very similarly or push themselves very similarly in their personal and professional ambition. The second is, when I mentioned discipline, it's just having a routine. And so the routine will, of course, apply to it will eventually apply to your professional career. But there's plenty of studies out there around the effects it has on individuals when you just have that routine. So starting with whatever you're doing in the morning, and I'm not talking about a physical fitness routine, but having a routine that you can wake up to. And as your personal life grows, whether or not one starts a family or their family's still growing, what I've found at least is having that routine during very stressful times has kept me grounded. And that's everyone is always going to have difficult times and difficult and unique situations and ambitions that they're going towards. The thing that continues to drive me is I have a little thing to my left that I wrote back in 2004. So gosh, 20 years ago, which is crazy to say that, on a piece of paper. And it says, how good do you want to be? And I was challenged with that when I first joined my fraternity. I was 18 years old, and coming from a background where doing that type of thing was not a part of how I grew up or my family. But at the time, an individual challenged me with that when I first joined the fraternity, and he had us write down that question, but then the things that drive us in life and challenge us in life. And what I wrote down was, first word, discipline. Second word I wrote down was driven, focused, stronger, success, and faith. So I wrote it down on a piece of paper, and it has
Wow.
traveled with me to a lot of places in this world, from Toledo, Ohio, to Memphis, Tennessee, Kansas City, obviously now here in Australia. But I always keep it somewhere with me. Now it's on the left. So I have my computer here, my big screen here, and then I always see it every day when I wake up. And I always keep it somewhere just to remind me of that question and the things that drive me towards ultimately trying to answer that question of how good I want to be in life. And it's taken on a much different meaning with a family and a wife and the kids that are the most important things to me. But that question and the things that drive me every day, that hasn't changed. Even though when I wrote it, I was 18 years old, not really understanding probably at the time what I was doing. But I would say the people you surround yourself with, your routine, your discipline, and then just asking yourself that question and maybe another question of just, how good do you want to be in life with your personal goals and ultimately your professional goals as well.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah. I love that. And I love one of the things that I keep taking away from conversations like this, and Eric, what you just described, is the power of intentionality. I mean, we oftentimes, I think we want to believe that things just happen and then we react. But I don't want to overspeak here, but I suspect that you would be one to say your accomplishments, while some of those may have been right time, right place, a lot of that is intentional about the discipline, about the day-to-day activities, about the things that you're leaning into that then set you up for success. And, just for our listeners, I don't think we can overemphasize the benefit of being intentional in how you use your time, where you spend your energy, and the things that you invest in to then get to whatever your objectives, goals, or desires may be. As we bring this to a close, Eric, we've covered a lot of really great ground. I think some phenomenal lessons and words of advice for our listeners. But truth be told, I think there's really one question that our listeners tune in to hear.
Yeah, most of them have fast forwarded through.
They have. If you look at the analytics, they jump to this part of the episode.
They just jump right to here.
Yeah, and you being our first global international guest, I'm quite fascinated. James has a real stumper for you. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but
I'm going to change the scenario slightly because I think the odds of you having to take a client to dinner in Kansas City are fairly low. Yeah. Although maybe you bring them here for a site visit. I don't know, but let's say that Eric, you have a layover in Kansas City in our huge airport, because that's where people, spend their time. And you've only got a couple hours to leave the airport and go get Kansas City barbecue. Where do you go?
I will preface that by saying I did this a week ago. I had 20 hours in Kansas City.
Oh, 20. Okay, so you hit like 5 or 6 different bars. But you only get to choose one.
Well, I do have to give a plug. My sandwich place I went to. That was the first place I went to for lunch. Carollo's in the River Market. It's my go-to.
Okay. Yeah.
And, big shout out. They used to come to the church I went to. They're awesome down there. So I did go there. My second is I'm a sucker for Oklahoma Joe's. Casey, I don't even know what it's called.
Joe's Kansas City. Yes. Yeah. Formerly known as Oklahoma Joe's. Now Joe's Kansas City. Okay.
Yeah, and I wish I could tell you. I stayed the night at one of my best friends, the best man at my wedding. I stayed at his place, and he ordered barbecue. I don't think it's called smash barbecue. It's like a one-word
slaps.
Slaps. He ordered
slaps. Oh
yeah, but we haven't heard that one yet.
I literally just met the owners of Slaps.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
great guys, great people.
Big shout out to Slaps. So a week ago, they not catered, but we ordered to the house that I was at. But my first choice absolutely would be Joe's, and then the second would be Q39.
Q39. Okay. All right.
So I think we need to
you
call.
gave like 4 answers there.
That's
by the way.
right.
And we just let him do it.
know.
Did you see how he did that?
Just-
He just kind of gave us 4 answers. I love it.
I think we need to call Oklahoma Joe's and see if we can't get something here, because we literally had someone travel around the world for the sole reason, that's what I heard anyway, the sole reason of having Oklahoma Joe's, just get their barbecue.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Eric, this has been an incredible conversation, journey. Let me just first say, not just thank you for being a guest on the pod, but just really admire what you've accomplished in the journey you're on. So kudos to you. Keep charging that hill. But absolutely, thank you for being a guest on the Counterweight.
Thank you, Eric. We'd love to keep in touch, man. We want to hear how you're doing. We'd love to have you back on.
Thanks, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. And if anyone's ever down this way, let me know. We always love when we have visitors in Australia. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right, cheers. Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. The Counterweight is honored to be sponsored by The Echelon by Amy Teskey. The Echelon is intentional about building community and sharing expertise for healthcare technology sellers and leaders. The Echelon provides members curated content, education materials, and the ability to connect with peers and leaders specific to healthcare technology. Sales can be hard. It is made easier when you are part of a community that is focused on enabling you to be your best. Take an opportunity to invest in yourself, join the Echelon, use the code Counterweight, and gain the ability to participate for the first 30 days at no cost. Thank you to Amy Teskey and the Echelon for your sponsorship. We are also proudly sponsored by the Upper Right Corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership, team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Lastly, we are proud to be sponsored by Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. Waypoint Healthcare is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementations and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.